I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar on 2020 Trends in Team Coaching. Peter and I were chatting a couple of weeks ago, and now that we're coming to the end of the year, I know 2019 isn't over, and I'm sure many of you are getting lots of requests to do team retreats and facilitations and end of the year reflections and 2020 visioning and all that. Probably here, I usually get a rush of those at the end of the year. But we thought this might be a good time before 2020 begins to have a bit of a conversation around what's happening in the emerging profession of team coaching and what are the trends that we want to be on the lookout for, to be able to keep up and be fit for purpose in this dynamic and evolving and changing field. And so who better to help us have that conversation than the distinguished Professor Peter Hawkins joining us today. I think he's in the Barrow Castle in the UK. So always great having Peter in the conversation and helping facilitate this. Can't think of a better person. I came across Peter, it was about 5 years ago. I started a podcast called The Team Coaching Zone. Some of you may have stumbled across that. And I was, as I started interviewing folks, I really started very quickly learning that I should interview Peter Hawkins. And I finally got him on in episode 19 and ended up having him on a few times. But that was a real wonderful beginning of a great collaboration and relationship that we have evolved over the years. Peter has been a wonderful mentor. He's a really distinguished thought leader. He's been thinking about team coaching and, doing lots of seminal work in this field for 30 plus years. He's the, author of Leadership Team Coaching, Developing Collective Transformational Leadership, which is in its 3rd edition now. He has a companion book of case studies. It's in, I believe, the 2nd edition. Really prolific. What I love about Peter is, a true Renaissance man. He's teaching. He is, writing books. He's, coaching teams, working with boards. So he's kind of living and breathing it from all angles. But also just a really fun guy, a really dynamic person. And, I feel myself fortunate to have been able to learn and study with Peter, have him as a supervisor, as a team coach. And I always like to say, just when you think you're starting to catch up in the area of team coaching, Peter then kind of comes along and raises the bar again. But wonderful to have a chief protagonist like that out there, stimulating us to evolve this growing profession and field. I've been fortunate to host Peter a number of times in New York City for the Systemic Team Coaching Certificate Program, and happy to share that next month in January, we're going to be running that program again, but for the first time, the full Diploma program. So we'll share more about that if any of you are interested in learning with Peter and from Peter. But Peter, that's probably more than enough. I hopefully done enough justice to your background and made you uncomfortable enough, right? Because as coaches, we're supposed to be supportive, but also challenging to get this session started. But why don't I kick it over to you, and we'll get this show on the road.
Well, thank you so much, Krista, and your introduction, as ever, was awesome. If I speak in American. Or as we say in England, the English translation of the American word awesome is not bad. So just to be bilingual for a moment, that was very kind of you. So today we're going to try and talk, it's so nice to have so many people online that I, colleagues, admire, who've written interesting stuff, and people who have done both the 3-day program with us that we'll talk about, and also the 1-year diploma course, which both Krista, who's online, and David Matthew Pryor, along with Hilary Lines and Catherine Carr, we're all going to be teaching that in New York, starting in January, going through next year. So we might talk a little bit about that at the end. But I thought we would start. You see, one of the things about webinars is if we talk about coaching, coaching always starts with inquiry, not with answers. And it starts with, for me, systemic coaching, whether it's team coaching or individual coaching, doesn't start by asking the team, what do you want from team coaching, or what do you want to hear about tonight? It starts from asking, who and what does this team serve? And what is it your stakeholders need? What's the work your stakeholders need us to be doing together? So I've just had several very great group of experienced coaches here today. And I really shocked them first thing in the morning by saying, I'm not interested in what my clients want. whether that's individual clients or team clients. I'm not interested in what they want from coaching. I'm interested in finding out from them, who does their work serve? What matters to them in their lives? What is it that their stakeholders need them to step up to? So, I shock a lot of people who've gone through ICF competencies by saying, I'm not interested in being on the coachee's agenda or the team's agenda. I'm interested in being on life's agenda, not my agenda or their agenda, but what is the work? What's the agenda that life's setting that we need to explore together? And so I invite you just to think about team coaching. Who does your team coaching serve? Both now and in the future. So think of the teams that you might have worked with. Think of teams you might be members of. Future teams that you might be going to work with or hope to work with. The organizations that those teams are part of. The stakeholders of those teams, the employees that report into that team. The customers of that team. Suppliers to the team. The community where the organization operates. We may go even further out and ask about the more than human world, the ecology that both supports that organization and is supported by it, and without which the organization couldn't exist. And as you call some of those people to mind, just ask yourself, what is it that all those stakeholders, those teams, need us to be focusing on this evening or this morning if we're in New Zealand, or this lunchtime if you're in America, that at least 100 of your stakeholders would benefit from you having the privilege of being on this call? What's the question they would be wanting you to ask on their behalf? What is the learning that they'd want you to be gathering so that you could be of even more value to them and to the world beyond them? And I think this is one of the very important trends in moving from coaching to systemic coaching, and from team coaching and team development and team building to systemic team coaching. Because now the team I'm working with is not my client, it's my partner. I'm not facing them, I'm shoulder to shoulder with them, and we're both facing the changing needs of their stakeholder ecosystem. And that we'll come on to is at the heart, I think, of some of the trends. But let's go back to what's some of the challenges that we're experiencing that teams are now facing. So I'd really encourage you to put into the chat box, what are the top challenges that are new that you're discovering teams you work with are having to face? And perhaps, one or two people might like to open their mics and just shout out your name and what's a challenge that your teams are facing. If you're shy, put it in the chat box. Now, if you're shy, shout it out. And if you tend to talk a lot, put it in the chat box. So we've got some coming in already. Poor leadership. Staying connected, coordinated in ambiguous changing circumstances. The whole VUCA world. Undefined culture due to diverse languages and cultures. How do we deal with diversity? Burnout, disconnected governance, changing world of business, communication from senior teams, trust steps to go from group to team. Wow, fear. Restructuring, change of strategy, get more done with less. Poor leadership. Great. So working with external partners, high turnover, less patience for messiness, I have the Irish Government Climate Action Division for a whole day. Fantastic, Tony. We'll talk about the environment. And the political system interface. How we interface with our stakeholders becomes so critical. Competitiveness. The knowing-doing gap. A fantastic one. We did some research, by the way, on team away days. Very simple question. We asked a lot of teams, do you have away days? And if so, what percentage of what you agreed last away day got translated into action? And it was very depressing. The answers we got were between 0% and 30%. And what we asked is, so what do we need to change about team coaching to change that percentage? Very important question. The same happens in individual coaching. The gap between good intentions and embodied change, we often leave on the table. We have this phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, action plans, and aha moments. How do we move in our coaching from insight and action plan to embodied change? How best to ride two horses? Being a member of multiple teams. Great. So let me just go on to the next slide, which I'm just going to share in the book. This is the third edition of it in 2017. I talked about some of the challenges for today's leadership teams. And I think you've added to that from your comments, so thank you. First of all, I talk on the courses for those, and some of you have been on my 3-day, either with McChrystal or in Canada or Europe or out in Australia, China. Has been on the courses out in Beijing with us. And we talk about the Unholy Trinity, that nearly every organization is having to do more at higher quality with less resource. And this is a worldwide phenomena. And that comes right down to the team. And most teams faced with what I call that Unholy Trinity go into pedal harder rather than work smarter. And one of the things in this VUCA world with changing stakeholder needs is that most leadership teams are facing, how do we meet the needs of our shareholders, the needs of our employees, the needs of our customers, the needs of our suppliers, the needs of the ecology, the needs of our communities. And what they do to try and face that is they split up those needs. They let the finance director look after the investors and the HR director look after the employees and the salespeople look after the customer. And they disaggregate the organization and they all rush around trying to meet all these stakeholder demands rather than look at how do we create a virtuous cycle in our ecosystem between all our stakeholder expectations. How do we partner with our stakeholders? Some of you know I did a 2-year research for the Henley Business School called Tomorrow's Leadership, a Necessary Revolution in Today's Leadership Development. And there's a lovely quote there from a CEO who said, look, leading today is like flying an aircraft at 5,000 feet or 40,000 feet and having to rebuild the aircraft while you're in flight, manage the team on the cockpit, the team back there with the passengers, talk to ground control and watch the changing climate come over the horizon. He said, that's today's leadership. And I think many teams struggle to both, in terms of the work on 3 horizons, to manage the 3 horizons of how as a team do we manage business as usual, horizon 1, innovating for tomorrow, horizon 2, and what's coming over the future horizon, the future foresight, horizon 3. And how do we get those working together? Somebody put into the chat box, how do we deal with the fact that in many organizations now, I will meet leaders who are members of not just 2 teams, but 5 teams, 10 teams, project teams, account teams, the executive team, their own functional team, multiple. And yet we're wired to think about who's part of my tribe and who's part of them. How do we help people do that? Working with systemic conflict, there is conflict in the system. And one of the things that we discovered doing a lot of the 3-day programs, and Crystal will remember this well when we do the simulation we do on the program, is what happens with systemic conflict. Like, we're in the public sector and taxpayers want to pay less tax, but service users want better quality service, right? That systemic conflict is we personalize it. We hear it as, oh, the finance director is mean and cutting our budget. We don't hear the systemic needs beyond the individuals. The world becoming more complex and interconnected. As Peter Senge says, we know how to thrive in localized niches. We're still trying to discover how to thrive in a globally interconnected niche. A couple of people have mentioned a lot of team coaching increasingly is having to be done virtually. And I was doing a conference for ICF in Arizona recently, and I was doing a keynote virtually. And they taught me this lovely new phrase out of Arizona, out of Phoenix, virtual vibrancy. So I've been training myself in how do we create intimacy and virtual vibrancy and experiential embodied engagement when we're doing this over Zoom. And then this final one, the major challenges lie not in the parts, but in the interconnections. Another CEO on the research said to me, Peter, I've got so many coaches who coach my people. I've got so many consultants we call in to sort out the different parts of the system, but that's not where my challenges lie. All my challenges lie in the connections. Where are the consultants and coaches who will coach and develop the connections for me, not just the parts? And so that leads us on to, so given that that's what teams are facing, what does that mean in terms of the top challenges for team coaches? So again, I invite you just to put into the chat box. Yeah, it may be too many of us online to shout them out, but to put into the chat box, what do you think that, given all those challenges that are in the chat box for teams, what's that meaning of the challenges for team coaches? So let's see what's coming in. Do put in what you think, therefore, are the challenges for you as a team coach or for team coaches generally. Resiliency, managing conflict, polarities. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Lisa and Kieran. Other ones coming in. Speaking the truth, saying what we notice. Maximum impact with minimal input. Thank you, Richard. We'll come back to that one. Clients don't understand how to ask for what they need. Polarities. Traditionally, trained coaches are taught to not coach multiple levels, which shuts down the systemic opportunities. Great, Mary. Love it. The civil service, it's the challenge of taking on the political system. Okay, let me just stop at Tony's. Accountability, holding a hard mirror. Fantastic. Truth-telling and the trust to move together. I think one of the things I would talk about today, just from seeing what's coming in, is a very simple one-liner. And by the way, if you send it to my website, I'll send you, I'm just about, many of you online received last year my blog, 13 Christmas Crackers for Team Coaches. And I'm just started to write the one for this Christmas, 13 new Christmas crackers. So if you send me your email on via my website, I'll make sure you receive it. And one of the things in the new one, it says, never locate the conflict or the problem in a person or a part of the system. Always locate the conflict in a connection. So if we're working with the civil service in Ireland, right, we have to say it's not the politicians that are the problem. It's we haven't yet, as a civil service, found a way of connecting with them that brings together the political necessities and the policy necessities and the implementation necessities. So we always locate the challenge in a connection that we are part of. And one of the most common things that we find we're having to train team coaches to do, because it's so prevalent everywhere in the world, one of the things we're having to do is to interrupt constantly the blame complaint statements that are made in every team, either about another team member or about something outside the team, like the politicians, the next level up, the people beneath us that haven't stood up, the support functions, and turn the complaint and blame into a request. What is it you need from the other to do your job? Locating the problem not in the other. So we have this lovely new phrase about othering. How do we help teams, and how do we interrupt the othering that goes on to take it back into connections? So when I talk, Mary Beth O'Neill, about coaching the connections, I would say that happens even if we're coaching an individual, because there's never just two people in the coaching room. There is always the fact that the individual brings with them into the individual coaching room the team dynamic they're part of, the organizational culture that's not just out there, but is within them, the collective mindset of their particular community, the ecology, all of those are in the room. So we are coaching connections even when we're working with just one person. But thank you for that. And let me close the comments down so I can change slides. This is, there we go. So thank you for those challenges. I want to talk just about 5 trends, given the time we've got. Working across boundaries, team of teams, how we work with artificial intelligence, not as a threat, but a partner. How do we bring the wider ecology into the coaching room? No, not how we bring it in. How do we become aware that the ecology is in every coaching room, but we're just screening it out? And how do we realize that doing systemic team coaching is not just about thinking systemically, but relating and doing systemically and being systemic? And then we'll say a bit about the courses. So traditionally, team coaching, when we first did, I was first involved 40 years ago. And if we look at it historically, we saw team building as seeing the team as built by the individuals. That what was important was getting the relationships right and building from the individual contributor to their relationships to the team. And we had this belief, and I think it wasn't just me, many of my colleagues, if only we all understood each other's Myers-Briggs personality profile and we had good relationships, we'd have a great team. And then the research came along from Katzenbach and Smith, from Richard Hackman, Ruth Wagaman, Michael West, research we did, and all of it said that's not true. It's not the relationships that create a highly effective team. It's actually having a collective purpose that everyone understands in an aligned way and recognizes we can only achieve through collaboration. So we then went to the next level, which I call system team coaching, where we actually realized that actually it wasn't the sum of individuals that was our client, it was the team. That we had to help them have effective meetings, generative dialogue, collaboration are very valued. How do we shift the dynamic from a disruptive one to a collaborative and generative one? And that became our focus, but we were still seeing the system as a bounded entity. And so we would talk about a high-performing team. And indeed, I apologize to all of those who've got my early editions of the book, because I talked a lot, I've sold lots of books about high performing teams. And I now say there's no such thing, because that concept comes from this level of team coaching. Now I say there's no such thing as a high performing team, because that means that, first of all, we make it as an end state to arrive at, and then it becomes a tick box exercise. Then what we do is we see the performance as residing in the team. So now in level 3, I talk about highly effective teams, which are teams that continually co-create value with and for all their stakeholders. Right? And so in systemic team coaching, yes, we do focus on the relationships and what needs to happen to have effective meetings, but we primarily start from it's the purpose that creates the team, not the team that creates the purpose. I'll say that again because it's a difficult concept to some people. You see, the purpose for me is not something, I spent many years helping teams create missions and visions, right? And we might create our own mission, but the purpose is asking the question, what can we uniquely do as a team that we can't do by working in parallel to each other, that the world out there of tomorrow needs? What can we uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? And that means that we have to start our team coaching not from what people want from team coaching, but outside in. Who are their stakeholders? What do they want? Future back. How are your stakeholders going to want something different tomorrow than what they appreciate today? How do we start with that inquiry process that starts by getting the future voice and the stakeholders' voice into the room? And some of you know that's therefore my definition. So I think we are still having to educate the clients to be aware of the different levels of what help they can get. We need to know, are they inviting us in just to help with an event or help shift the performance of the team? Or are we there to help them as systemic team coach land the gap between where they are today and where the world of tomorrow needs them to be? And having landed that gap in the team and with the team, help them on the journey from one to the other. And for those of you many of you will be very familiar with this. It was from that approach we developed the 5 disciplines. And you see, I've still got the old wording up there. I must have used an old version. Now it says highly effective teams and boards, where we start with the commissioning. Why are we a team? Who are we in service of? Not just what does the team above us want as our targets, but who are all the different stakeholders we serve and what are the different things they need from us, and how do we integrate that co-mission that is around us and within us. And only when we got clear about the why can we move across to the clarifying of the what. So what do we need to focus on as a team? What do we need to do collectively as opposed to in parallel? What are our team KPIs, our team objectives? What are the roles we need to play in different parts of the pitch? And what do we need to collectively own? And having done the why and the what, we can move to the how of, so how do we need to be together to play the game that the world of tomorrow requires from us? And then we can go on to, so how are we a team the rest of the week when we're out with the stakeholders, not sitting in our team meeting? And how do we carry that teamness with us? How do we feel that we've got the support and the resource of the team when we're not together, but also that we are representing all of our team, not just our part of it? And as I often say, one of the big things we found from the research, we've had about 250 teams fill in questionnaires on this 5 discipline, and 90% of them have their lowest scores in the 5th discipline in the middle, in core learning. This is how the team collectively grows its individual and collective capacity to be future fit, to be able to do more at higher quality, often with less resource, to make a quantum step up, not by pedaling harder, but by growing their collective resourcefulness, resilience, and sustainability. And by the way, when I was out in Australia, Michael Kavanagh gave me a lovely new definition of resilience. Some of you know Michael Kavanagh at the University of Sydney Coaching Centre. He said, resilience is the capacity to tap into unrealized potential and resources. Resilience is the capacity to tap into resources in our team we're not tapping into, or indeed resources out there in our stakeholder system that we haven't yet discovered ways of partnering with. Krista, let me pause there and see if other questions have come in.
Yeah. So just taking a look here, nothing's come in the chat since we were brainstorming what we thought the trends were.
Is anyone wanting to open their microphone and come back and just any challenge or question that's emerged from what I've shared so far before I go on to the next 4 levels of key trends?
Peter, I'm just curious, the thing about learning is something that I find with many of the teams that I'm working with, that just the demands, the fires they're putting out, the task pressure seems to just keep us locked into that. And I'm curious, have you found teams, or, have you been able as a team coach to really help teams shift to bring learning much more into the foreground rather than in the background or non-existent? I'm thinking it's just, case examples or stories around that.
I also see there's a couple of questions that have come in, like repeat the definition of resilience, and how do we as team coaches evolve the mindset versus push the mindset? Yeah, we were playing with that today, so I might talk about that as well. The thing about the learning, so one of the new one-liners is team coaching never ends, it just transitions. It transitions from being done by the external coach to an internal coach, or the team leader, or by the team itself. So that one of the things that we have to deliver before we leave is a team that can carry on team coaching itself. Because if we have to do more at higher quality with less resource, and not do that just by pedaling harder, but by work constantly shifting gear and working smarter and growing our collective capacity, then we need to be an agile learning team. And how do we build that into so that it's not something we just do when we go on away days, but it's something we're doing in every meeting? So, for instance, I will always, when I'm working with teams, I won't just do offsites. I will then sit in on their ordinary meetings and help how do we transform what they've talked about in the offsite into how it changes the next meetings they do. And I won't just give them feedback at the end. We'll do timeouts through it, in which we'll stop and we'll build learning into the process. So the one I often quote is that the team that used to have 4-hour executive meetings, right, every Monday morning, which I thought, wow, what a great way to destroy energy for the week. So I sat in on their meetings and I said, halfway through, I'll call a timeout and we'll just, we'll do a half-time team talk. But rather than wait for 2 hours, I called it after 45 minutes. And I just said, right, I want you to go around and say, the thing we've done that's created the most value in the first half of this meeting is, and how I think we could create more value in the second half is, with no discussion. Because otherwise we would have had a 5-hour meeting with a post-mortem in the middle. And just by surfacing that awareness, their meetings got shorter and shorter, and they had far better meetings in less than half the time by the time I'd finished coaching them and transitioned the coaching. Yeah. But what they'd also done is they'd learned to call timeouts in the middle of their own meeting, right? So and at the end, when we did the transition, they said, look, we're gonna have a process holder for each meeting, not the chair, different from the chair, and their job is to call at least 2 timeouts. So that was a kind of transition in building core learning. Oh, another thing they did, they said they hadn't got any time to do reflection. Right. So I just asked the question. I said, how often do you go out and meet stakeholders together? They said, oh, well, we're always going and doing pitches together, and we're going out to talk to investors together. I said, so do you travel together? They said, yeah, we're normally in the taxi or in the plane. Or I say, all right. So how could you use that time? And they developed what they invented called Be Brief, Debrief, which was after each joint meeting with a stakeholder, they would each say, this is one thing, Krista, I think you've done well. This is one thing I think you could have done better. This is one thing I think I did well, and one thing I could have done better. This is one thing I thought we did well between us, in the space between us. And one thing I think we could do better. And they call it the Be Brief, Debrief. It had very strict kind of ritual to it. And they did that on every stakeholder visit. So these are, I'm fascinated with how we embed learning mechanisms in the everyday BAU, business as usual. But let's just look at.
There's some great questions that have come in, Peter.
Yeah.
Probably you could blow the rest of the webinar, not blow it, but, take up all the time here. But we've got some about, ego-driven bosses and defensive bosses, pushback on, raising the issue of the environment in teams, because that's one of our values maybe, but not necessarily.
Pause, Chris, because I had this lovely moment. I think there's at least one person from Romania online. So let me thank Romania for this. I was at the ICF conference in Bucharest and got asked this question: how do you get the egos out of the coaching room? And I, being myself, said, "What do you mean, your ego or your client's ego?" I said, "Oh, but both. Of course, it's what else could she say?" And I left the question up on the board until the end of the talk, and I came back to the questions, and I came back to that one, and I said, it was a spontaneous answer. I said, listen, if we fill the coaching room, one-to-one or team, with enough voices of the stakeholders, there isn't the space for the egos. And I think, we all have egos, but if we as coaches, individual coaches and team coaches, can really learn the skills of constantly bringing in the significant critical stakeholders into the room, either literally, metaphorically, through empty chairs that many of you know I always use, in boardrooms, I always use a chair for the investors, a chair for the customers, a chair for the employees, a chair for the future generations and the ecology. The more we bring those into the room, the less room there is for ego. And the same way as, I say there's no such thing as a toxic boss, an impossible employee, a difficult customer. There is only a mode of engagement we have not yet found. Right? And so we talk about mindsets. I think, one of the mindsets I'm trying, David, to Matthew Pryor, to constantly interrupt is we create all these difficult people out there, right? As soon as we say we can only work on connections that we're part of. So when people say, oh, you can't do that in the Irish government, Tony, I just have a one-word reframe. Which puts it straight back into the team as not something that's easy to do, but something that's possible to do that we haven't yet found.
Peter, your audio muted for me when you were about to say the reframe. I think you were about to say the one word is yes.
Oh, Richard put it in the chat box for me. Thank you.
It could have been more perfect timing, but.
Yeah, so they said, they'll say you can't do that in this organization. I just say yet. It's the one word reframe. Thank you, Richard. Bet on yet, David. Oh, great humor. Okay, so I'm going to go on from there. We'll hold some of those questions for a little later, Krista. But that's really useful. So keep the questions coming in, not just when I ask them. So now I have to get back. So the second one is, and Krista's been doing lots of work around this across America, Singapore, all parts of the world. Lovely book by General McChrystal. Some of you've probably read his book, well worth a read, about how he was left with the unenviable task of coordinating all the forces in Iraq, post-war Iraq, so-called post-war, because more people were dying per week post-war than were dying in the war. And he realized that he had the best trained, best equipped, best resourced army ever assembled, with great teamwork going right across the organization. But they were being totally outmaneuvered by small cells of amateur terrorists, if there is such a thing. And what he realized is they knew how to build great teams, but they didn't know how to build a team of teams. A team where there is much trust and collaboration between teams as in teams. And this points up, I thought beautifully he pointed up, the danger in creating high-performing teams. Because what happens is we create psychological safety within the team. And the more we do that, we create, you're safe as long as you're with us in the team, but out there is dangerous. Like, don't trust any of the others. Yeah. I often comment on how I did this when I was first a parent with my eldest, who's now 41, that we were very into this total bonding and sleeping with the baby, carrying the baby around, skin to skin contact. And I realized, and it's coming out in how he's now parenting my grandchildren, that what we taught him subliminally was the world is safe as long as you're with us. Out there is dangerous. And we do that with teams. And so a lot of his book and what he's written since has been about how do we build and coach the spaces between teams. And in leadership team coaching and practice, there's a lovely case study working with a South African airline on how do we get all the coaches, and there's one about working with an NHS hospital, for those of you who work with the health service, about having simultaneous coaching going on in a very large room with all different teams, getting them to present their team charter to each other and then give feedback, and then coaching what is it they need from the other teams in order to fulfill their own team charter. So requests, negotiation, coaching, the collaboration in the spaces between. Other ways, how do we coach increasingly shadow leadership teams? But not just coach the executive team, the leadership team, and the shadow leadership team of young future millennial leaders, but then coach how those two teams come together. So I made the mistake when I first coached shadow leadership teams working on the same issues as the exec, to get them and come to the exec suite and report back. It was a disaster because they would do a lot of work, be really creative. They would come into the exec that were already there and get patronized. Oh, very good ideas. Thank you very much. We've written them all down and we'll take those away and incorporate them in what we do. Right? It just built disappointment in the young millennials. So now I bring them together and get them to present their thinking on the same topic. And I say, I'm going to score you on how many mindset shifts do you get in the other group. Right? So I would call this team-on-team coaching. I then also say, all right, we're going to split you into 2 from this team, 2 from that team, little subgroups. And your job, having heard from both groups that have worked on this issue, is to come up with new thinking that is better than the exec team has come up with or the shadow leadership team has come up with. And that way, we're coaching the connection, not just the 2 teams. So does that give a good example, Krista? Yeah, great. So let me go on to a third area, which is some of the disruptors that are happening to executive coaching. And I'm going to particularly talk about the second one. But I'll send you these slides so you can see the others. But artificial intelligence. And let me put this up. Here is an executive coach profile now available near to where you live, whether it's in New Zealand, India, China, or America. A coach who's available 24 hours a day, will work anywhere in the world, can provide empathy and match the coach's language, emotions, and style. Is experienced working in all sectors, keeps confidentiality, remembers everything you have told them. Does that sound an attractive coach? Because by now you probably realized I'm talking about a AI coach rather than a human coach. Yeah, we know all the things that are up there have already been done with AI. Yeah. And so the question I've been asking for some time is, what can we do that AI can't? And how can we give up a lot of the things that we earned money out of yesterday, which can now be done by the manager? In my day, managers didn't have much EQ and they had to get executive coaches in. And so they would outsource their difficult conversations. Now, I think we have to move coaches on. We need to train up AI and managers to do what we used to do, internal coaches we train up the managers and AI to do what we used to do 10 years ago, internal coaches to do what we were doing last year and this year, and move on to what can we uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs. I think coaching has been so successful that we've reached the stage where Bill Gates says success is a lousy teacher. It teaches you complacency and keeps you stuck in yesterday's answers. And so I've been working for 3 years in the team coaching zone and also in the individual coaching zone. But let's look at the one at the bottom, Sabre, that they've developed a team coaching bot, which we can train managers to coach their own teams using. And it uses the 5 disciplines. But what's really interesting is the level 1 I've trained team coaches using it in is to use it as a team coaching assistant. So somebody put in the question, how do we deal with the lack of follow through with what people agree in the team? Well, one of the things we do is we collect on the team coaching bot all the material that's generated at the one day, including all their commitments and what they're going to then put on the team coaching canvas. And the system automatically sends them reminders and says, you were going to do a re-edit of those team behaviors, right? And put it online so we could all vote on them. And it's due in 2 days' time, right? It's now overdue. And then it sends out a thing automatically to the team to say, please, can you now do your voting on prioritizing in those team behaviors? So it keeps the team coaching going between your visits. That's level 1. Level 2, which is exciting, is you can then, say you're coaching the top team, you could collect everything on the team canvas and then get all the team members to coach their own teams using the team coaching bot because they've been introduced to it. Or you can start bottom up and we can train managers right across who are working, perhaps to do a culture change. You can customize the team coaching bot, teach them all how to coach their own teams through the cultural transition. And that way the team coach moves from being just coaching 2 or 3 teams in an organization to becoming the orchestrator of the team coaching. Because they keep there's an online dashboard of the activity, which preserves confidentiality, but gives, this is where team coaching is happening, who's doing what, who's plugging into which of the different modules on the app, what people are putting in terms of their reflections on that, what reviews are happening. And then the third level, after being the orchestrator of the team coaching, is to move to being the cultural curator, where with negotiating the confidentiality, which stays within the team rooms, the external team coach is the only one who has access to all the different team rooms and never shares any of the individual comments, but shares some of the cultural issues that are coming up across teams, only ones that are appearing in multiple teams. And so it comes like feeding back a pulse survey, but one that's tapping into the collective and relational field, not just individual viewpoints. And to me, that's really exciting because it means we can help team coaches move to being enterprise-wide teaming culture change agents. If you're interested in that, send me an email at the end. We've run the first webinar-based training for experienced team coaches who want to be trained in how they can use this and introduce it to their clients, that I've run with the AI people at Sabre. We're going to be running another one early next year if you're interested. And this is just a bit about how to use the 5 disciplines within the and what does a team canvas look like. And they built, with help from me, they built things about, what are the team behaviors that are helpful and unhelpful module that the team leader can take their team through. Some stuff about our team purpose that you can take the team through. The third trend, I'll have to watch time. We're very short. I would, I'm sorry, that webinar is gone, but there is still online. And again, I'll send this to you. There is an online manifesto that we're asking coaches around the world to sign for coaching trainings, professional bodies, coaching organizations and individual coaches to declare climate emergency with what they can sign up to do in their own practice. Why I often face people saying, well, why is this issue different from other things like diversity? And I'll send you this slide about why this is totally different to any other issue, because there's nobody not affected by it. It's not out there in the future or out there outside the organization. It's inside the organization. It's inside the team. It's inside the individual. And there's more and more evidence to say that either consciously or unconsciously, everyone we coach is experiencing some degree of eco-anxiety, either voiced or unvoiced. Yeah. And so the ecology is already there in the room, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the furniture we use. It's not absent from any coaching room. The problem is the awareness of it often is. So we've been doing a lot of work about how do we in team coaching and individual coaching go from eco-informed to eco-aware to eco-engaged to eco-active, not just with our clients, but across the profession. In the new book that's coming out in 2 weeks' time, a quick plug for that, Krista, called Systemic Coaching. I've applied a lot of what we developed in systemic team coaching back to individual coaching. I've written it with Eve Turner, and we bring together contributions from around the world of people who are actively using the ecology, not just attending to the ecology, but using the ecology to help do the coaching. Ecology is a resource for us. It's part of the coaching partnership that can help us do the coaching, not just be a problem in the coaching. We talk about the ecological awareness model that we all need to go on. And then I'm just going to go on to, I'm going to skip this, to say a little bit about the 5th trend. And that is that I think we spend a lot of time helping people think systemically. So there was a lot of questions about how do we work with polarities. There's a lovely little video, by the way. If you go onto YouTube and put in Colin Price and you put spinning plates and the art of leadership, he talks about how do we move from dealing with problems to dealing with puzzles to dealing with polarities to dealing with paradoxes. And a lot of what we teach in team coaching is how do you deal with polarities and either-ors that teams get locked into? And it relates to, David, your question. How do we shift mindsets? One of the things I do a lot is I've not yet met a team that doesn't have an either-or stuck conversation. And I introduce them to the notion that if you're having the same either-or debate for the 3rd time, rule number 1 is you're asking the wrong question. Rule number 2 is both solutions by definition are wrong, but both represents systemic needs we as a team have not yet found a way of connecting. So, should we, either or is like, should we centralize or decentralize? Should we grow by acquisition or organically? if you're going around that for the third time, it's a stuck puzzle that you need to turn first of all into to polarity awareness and then into paradox, and not both solutions are wrong. We have to find the transcendent third position that meets both lots of needs but doesn't fall into the trap of the either or the or. I particularly work hard on this in America, where people say the way out of either or is both and. And I have to say, I don't believe that's right. The way out of either or is not both and, it's neither nor. It's an answer that cannot be found within the current way we're constructing the debate. And there are ways of helping teams do that. But so we have to do a lot around systemic thinking, but then we have to do some stuff about systemic doing. What are the ways of working with the different disciplines? What are the underlying psychological models, methods? But then importantly, we have to work with how do we not just think systemically and use systemic tools, but how do we show up systemically? How do we shift our being to being systemic? And that is the bit that takes much longer. So on the 3 days, for those of you who might still have 3 days free in January to come and join Krista and myself in New York, and there are several people online, by the way, who've done the program. It's a very intense 3 days because it's as much about unlearning as it is about learning. It's about, we often say to the people on it, if you're not in the simulation making at least 6 quality failures a day, you're probably not unlearning fast enough. So, and a quality failure is one that we generously make available to others to learn from as well as ourselves. It's very active. It's about learning through doing. So from the second afternoon, you are thrown in the deep end of doing the inquiry process with a team in real time in this simulation that we set up. Then you're feeding back your findings in co-designing the journey with the team. And then each table group ends up coaching one of the 5 disciplines. So we're trying throughout that 3 days to have the learning happen at the thinking and expertise level, at the doing level, and at the being level. I'm sure the people who are online would all attest to the fact that it's, many people say it's the most intense 3 days they've ever done, because we're learning at all those levels. And one of the things that we introduced right from the beginning is peer responsibility. Because there's so much written about how do we create psychological safety. I like to write about how do we have the necessary unsafety in the team. Because most of my experience of senior teams is they don't have too much conflict, they have too little conflict. And what conflict they have, they personalize. Right? And one of the problems is how do you help teams handle more conflict but not take it personally? So we practice that on the group by taking peer responsibility to keep everyone in the discomfort zone, the unlearning zone, and out of the panic zone where we go into amygdala hijack, or the comfort zone of trying to get it right. At the end of the 3 days, people go away understanding the difference between systemic team coaching and other forms, how we bring coaching and organizational change together, different levels of team dynamic, and we do some application back to your own teams. So you go away with some stuff you can try out. But then next year we're starting this diploma in America, which has been running for about 10 years. There's some graduates from it, like Richard online. We're also been running it for 3 years in South Africa. We're about to start one next year in China. And in this, everyone who comes on this has gone through the 3-day certificate, but then goes through 4 other modules, which are about every 3 months. But in between, they are all working with, and they get some help from the course, to find a team they can work with over 9 months or a year. Because in our experience, there are lots of good team facilitators out there who can run good events. What we're much shorter is people who can partner with a team systemically to work over 9 months or a year with them in a way that they carry on doing the work after the team coach finishes. and can work through all those 5 disciplines. So on the program, everyone's bringing a client. So we're learning off not just your own client, but other clients in your supervision group. And we have quite a large faculty team, including the ones I mentioned earlier. There's 5 of us in the American program, all very experienced team coaches. And in the supervision groups, we all bring our learning. And so we're watching the journey of 5 teams, not just our own. And we're going through the different disciplines and the different stages of the journey. And we're getting supervision. And we're doing lots of fast forward rehearsals on the modules of trying out different ways of intervening. And that ends up with people writing the journey of their team and their own learning journey and their own approach, their own signature approach, integrating what they've learned at theory, doing, and being levels into what they could say to future clients about their unique way of doing team coaching. Those are the dates for New York. You'll see, for those of you in New York, I'm sure the question will come up from New Zealand, when are we doing it? We are looking at, with Australia, where we've run a number of systemic team coaching in Singapore and Japan, about whether we can do one that might rotate around Australia, Singapore, and Japan, as well as the one in China. Those will be the 5 hubs. We're also working with WBEX to next year launch which Crystal will be involved in and some others, a virtual systemic team coaching training through WBEX with David Clutterbuck, myself, with Wagaman, Krista, and other people from around the world. So there's a lot happening. We hope that at least some of the things we talked about today, and we'll just take, if we can beg, are we finishing at 7 or 15 or 30?
Today, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, we're already a little bit over, so I think
let's just take
bring us to a
quick
close, and then whoever can stick around. Yeah.
Yeah, whoever can stick around. For those of you who can't, thank you for joining. Do send any, post any questions, and we will try and post some Q&A answers for people. So do, before you go, rush off, put your question in, and even if we don't deal with it now, we will try and post both the slides and some Q&A with things we haven't addressed. Yep, in South Africa, there is an ongoing several STC programs and the Diploma program. The third one is currently just coming to an end, and there'll be a 4th one late 2021. Yeah. Some people are going off to cook dinner.
Yeah, we can see if that they get some real-time benefit from this session today. Maybe they'll enlist the stakeholders of their dinner.
Yeah.
Effectively.
And learn to partner, cook together rather than exchange pre-cooked food.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you, Kieran. This was the best 3 days of training I've ever taken. A lot of high quality failures and unlearning. Lovely to hear that. Kathy, the foundation is the same as the AOEC STC certificate. Yes, it's the STC certificate and diplomas are done jointly between Renewal Associates, the AOEC, and in many parts of the country, local partners. So we not only teach you to coach in partnership, we deliver it in partnership. Yeah, Rich is off to his home team. Is the program only for coaches who already work with teams? No, the certificate, we have people who come on who are leaders of teams. We have people who come on who are HR folk. We have consultants come on it, and we have coaches. You need to have some interest in developing some teams. When it comes to diploma, again, we've had 2 CEOs come and do the whole diploma out in South Africa. But you have to have a team that you can work with over time to do the diploma. You don't for the STC. You just have to have some experience of being out there with teams and really want to look at how you can make teams better, whether it's from HR, leader, consultant, or coach. And we love that mixture on the STC programs. Cynthia talks about doing it in 2015 in Beijing. And Cynthia now is involved in running in China which is fantastic. They sent me a whole presentation. There are 3 cities in China who are doing study groups, reading the books and practicing. The energy in China around systemic team coaching is fantastic. I'm so inspired by it. Sebastian Fox's question. How much conscious commissioning happens in established teams? One of the things we start when we work with teams is most commissioning is not done in a formal way. And so what tends to dominate is targets that are set from above rather than multi-directional stakeholder commissioning. So when we start, we ask, who does your team serve? Who are your critical stakeholders? And we have a whole Team 360 online now where you can nominate your stakeholders, and we send out the questionnaire to all your critical stakeholders and all your team members about what they value about the team, what they need different based on the 5 disciplines. So we help teams do much more conscious 360, 720 commissioning. Yeah. And 9 months later, we'll rerun the questionnaire to see have we closed the gap. So it's a fantastic evaluation process. Lily from Romania, thank you. It was so inspiring being in Bucharest and the questions that came from there. And Maria, fantastic, lovely. It's such a fantastic global community, this. What I'm trying to discover how we can keep such a vibrant global community, but do so much more of it with less air miles.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you for your questions. The ones we haven't addressed, we'll try and do so. Thank you for joining. Have a great Wednesday in New Zealand, great Tuesday in America, and a lovely supper in Europe.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck. Have a great evening.